Welcome to this week's virtual Drasha. This week we have the incredible privilege to read Parshas Terumah. And Terumah initiates the series of parshas which are devoted to the creation and fabrication of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the temporary structure we used in the Midbar, in the desert for 40 years, that served as the central hub for religious service, as well as the creation and fabrication of the Big Day Kuna, the Kohanic vestments. And so in this week's parsha, excitingly enough, the Torah gives us all of the instructions and all of the dimensions for the various kelim, the various utensils. And the Torah says this is in Parak Chaf Hey, Pasuk Yud, chapter 25, verse 10. Va'asu aron atse shitim. You shall make an aron, an ark. I think we'd all agree that whereas each and every utensil in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Mishkan, was so beautiful and was so unique, the aron, the ark, was really the quintessential cleat, was the quintessential utensil. It was the cleat that contained the luchos, the tablets from the kruvim, the two cherub-like figures perched on top. The divine voice would emanate forward towards Moshe Rabbeinu. And so the Torah says, you shall make an aron out of acacia wood. Now the truth is, we know that in fact the aron was really made of 3 boxes. There was an outer gold box, an inner wood box, and then a third smaller gold box inside. And the Torah says, what are the dimensions of the aron? Amasayim v'chitzi arko, 2.5 amos in length, va'ama v'chitzi rachbo, 1.5 amos in width, va'ama v'chitzi kamaso, and 1.5 amos in height. Now the truth is, to be honest, a lot of times when we see these types of measurements and dimensions, we kind of tune out a little bit. Number one, because sometimes it's hard to exactly understand how does the amma translate, what does it actually mean, but also because most of us are not that detail oriented with these kind of things. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe Zecher Tzadik Livracha makes an amazing observation, and he says, if you notice, all of the measurements of the ark are partial measurements, right? It's 2.5 amos in length, 1.5 amos in width, and 1.5 amos in height. Everything is 1.5, 1.5, 2.5. Why incomplete measurements? So in other words, remember, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was constructing this. He could construct it any way he wants. In other utensils, you may have one of the dimensions that's a partial measurement, but very often you'll have complete measurements as well. Yet here by the ark, again, Amasayim v'chitzi arko, 2.5 amos in length, 1.5 amos in width, and 1.5 amos in height. Why the half amos by each dimension? And the Rebbe says something so beautiful. He says, I want to quote to you, Midos ha'aron hayakulan chatsuyos. All of the dimensions of the ark were partial dimensions, partial measurements. Ki ha'aron romeis la Torah, va'torah tzricha lifal ba'adam halomei Torah, es sheviras harigilus v'hamidos araos shalom. The Rebbe says, because in these dimensions is embedded the very secret to spiritual success. You see, the Rebbe makes an amazing observation. He says, when you have a complete measurement, let's say again, it's 2 amos. So 2 amos is a complete, contiguous measurement. He says complete, contiguous measurements represent regilos, represent habits. Habits represent a certain continuity in behavior. Partial measurements, let's say a half an amma, represents ultimately a breaking of the continuum or a breaking of the habits. And here the Rebbe says something so beautiful. Spiritual success is fundamentally dependent on, rooted in, and tethered to the ability to break habits. He says, Es shviras haragilus v'hamidos haroshalo. Spiritual success is fundamentally dependent on shviras haragilus. Can you go ahead and break the habit? Can you break the continuity? Can you break the regularity? And the reason why this is incredible is as follows. Habits could be very profound and very positive. A perfect example, we daven 3 times a day. We daven 3 times a day, and if you think about it, although the goal, of course, is to be able to have kavanah, to really have concentration and intentionality when we daven each and every time, the truth is most of us don't. Most of us really don't, right? I'm happy if I have kavana 1 time. Did I get kavana in Shachris? It's a great day. Or maybe a kavana in Mincha, fantastic. Or a chapa ma'ariv that lifts me up, great. Do I have kavana regularly 3 times a day? Not me. I'm sure all of you do, but not me. I don't. I find it difficult. So you ask yourself, so what's the point of davening 3 times a day if you don't have kavanah in every single tefillah? It's very simple. It's habit forming. I'm forming a positive habit. What habit am I forming? The habit of speaking to God. Sometimes I pay attention when I'm speaking to God. Sometimes I don't pay attention when I'm speaking to God. But I'm forming a positive habit. So much of successful living is by creating positive habits, daily habits that I do day in and day out. I feel like it, I don't feel like it, I'm into it, I'm inspired, I'm not. This is my habit. This is what I do. It's the same thing. A person goes in and is kovei itlum Torah. A person sets aside time to learn. There are days I come to shir, I have to give the shir Baruch Hashem, so it's easier for me. But I can imagine sometimes a person shows up, they sit in shir. Sometimes it's like in one ear, out the other. Or maybe the material or whatever it is that we're covering is so uninteresting, and you wonder to yourself, for this I gave up sleep, for this I gave up time with my family, for this I gave up an hour at the office. But I show up every day. That's what it means to be kovei itlum Torah. I show up every single day. I'm creating a positive habit. What habit? I learn Torah. I learn Torah. Some days I'm into it, some days I'm not as into it, some days I'm inspired, some days it's a little flat. I'm creating a habit. I daven 3 times a day, I create a positive habit. I learn every day, I create a positive habit. But sometimes habits are destructive. And sometimes there are negative habits, negative behaviors that have become so habitually ingrained that they're part of who and what I am. And it's those habits that hold me back. It's those behaviors that hold me back. And these habits, this is what the Rebbe calls regilos, this continuous behavior. It could be in the form of a negative character trait. It could be in the form of literally like a negative activity that I engage in all too often. Or it could be the habit, the regilos, of associating just with the wrong kind of people who may be good people deep down, but they're not going to help me advance my life agenda. Says the Rebbe, what do you have to do when you have a negative habit? You break it. You break it. You stop it. Now the truth is, it's easier said than done. Breaking a habit is an incredibly different thing. Sometimes I'm addicted to my habits, like the smoker is addicted to the nicotine, like the alcoholic is addicted to the alcohol. Sometimes I'm just addicted to things. And anytime you're addicted to a habit and you need to break the habit, it can be a Herculean, overwhelming task. But lest you think that it's not possible, says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Torah purposely says the Aron, which is the quintessential utensil which represents the holiness of the individual, is all in partial measurements. 2.5, 1.5, 1.5, half. Why? Because the half represents only a piece of the whole. A half represents a broken part. The amma is a whole. The half a amma is a half of the whole. I've taken something and I've broken it, representing our ability to take a habit and to break it, to take a behavior and to break it, to take an addiction and to break it. The secret to successful living, says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zechatzate the Kaddish Levracha, Zechusa Yagin Alinu, is the ability to figure out which habits I should create because they're necessary for successful living, and which habits I should break because they're derailing my life. They're derailing me from becoming the best version of myself. There are habits to make, and there are habits to break. And the half amma symbolizes our ability to do so. So we should be zocha. On this Shabbos at Parshas Terumah, we read about the creation of the Mishkan. And when we read about the construction of the physical Mishkan, we're reminded, Bilvavi Mishkan Evna, that we each have the ability to build our personalistic Mishkan as well. But to build that Mishkan, you have to create habits that are going to advance your life agenda, and you have to find the courage to break the habits that are holding me back. Wishing everyone a good and Erev Shabbos and a beautiful Shabbos Kodesh.